Welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest neurosurgeon Dr. Jack Kruse. Dr. Kruse is a respected neurosurgeon and CEO of Optimized Life, a health and wellness company dedicated to helping patients avoid the healthcare burdens we typically encounter as we age. He's a member of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, the Congress of Neurologic Surgeons, and Age Management Medicine Group. Dr. Jack Kruse, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
Thank you. Appreciate you inviting me.
It's my pleasure. So you have articles, lots of articles on EMFs on your website. It's honestly pretty impressive. I've been going through it. My question is quite simply, what sparked your interest in EMFs and health, electromagnetic fields and health? How did this all start?
My own failures. That's really the answer. It's that simple. One of the key things that I teach people is that if you're not good enough for yourself, who are you good for? And I would love to tell you that I came to this altruistically as a physician because I appreciated the problem in my patients, and that wasn't the case. Something unusual happened to me around 2004, 2005 when I was at a spine meeting. And I was fortunate that I had another colleague's wife who worked for a drug company tell me she thought that she knew why this happened to me. I tore my knee meniscus standing up to give a talk. And what she was trying to impart to me was that the company she was working for was kind of cooking the data. And she knew through her husband that I was a pretty smart guy. And I think she was hoping that I would go down that rabbit hole. And what I effectively did is went down a completely different rabbit hole. And the rabbit hole was I realized that I originally tore my knee meniscus because of inflammation in my body. And that inflammation was ultimately tied to the environmental exposures that I was allowing as a surgeon in the operating room. And the biggest one for me was the circadian mismatch of living basically a night shifted life for pretty much my entire life from, I would say, the age of 24 all the way, which at that point, I guess I was 40 years old. And that's when it hit me. And it was a lightning bolt moment. But the irony was it started out with the number one most dangerous EMF. And you probably won't hear this from most of the people on this summit. It's blue light. And people don't realize because blue light is found naturally in sunlight, but it's never by itself. And it turns out that our modern world uses that blue light like we are doing right now. That's part of the reason I've decided to go outside in the sun when we're doing this, because this mitigates my risk of talking to you about it. But blue light subtracted from the other frequencies in the rainbow is devastating to biology. And once you understand the blue side of things, then it's not that difficult to start jumping all through the spectrum and start to find out all these different things, both from the extreme low frequency end all the way up to the cosmic range, because each one has its own little house-how-we shaped bag of tricks that the mitochondriac, the person who wants to be educated about how this affects your biology, wants to learn.
So, yeah, fascinating. And so that's through the blue light. And I'd like to talk about the blue light more because it is really important. I know you know a lot about that. So it's fascinating that was your introduction into this EMF world. So you are a highly respected neurosurgeon. I'd like to ask you about the brain. Get this opportunity to speak to a neurosurgeon about the brain is great. So can I ask you this? How do EMFs, electromagnetic fields, how do they affect the brain?
Well, they do it in a lot of different ways. Okay, I'll give you like the top three because we could sit here and talk the whole hour just about this question. But the first thing that has been well worked out in the literature is it causes a problem with voltage-gated channels on the surface of the cell. That's number one. That changes the amount of calcium that goes into the cell. And what does that eventually do? It changes free radical signaling free radical signaling begins in mitochondria. Hence, you can't see the shirt where it says mitochondriacs.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It's going to turn out that everything in EMF actually affects that genome in our body. Most people think that it's the other genome, meaning the nuclear DNA. Turns out the other genome is the one that you need to pay the most attention to if you're interested in EMS, because that's the one it affects. But the major effect, the one effect that I want everybody in the summit to really know if they don't know, is that non-native EMF. That means EMF outside of the visible spectrum of light causes a net dehydration of the cell. And most people do not realize this, Lloyd, that our mitochondria makes CO2 and water. And here's why this is important. This is how the basics of my site start. Most people know and learned in third grade about photosynthesis. It takes CO2 plus water and sunlight to make sugar. That nobody argues with that. What they failed to realize, though, is a mitochondria reverses that process. It takes sugar, turns it into CO2, and makes water. Turns out the water that your mitochondria makes is not like the water that comes out of your tap at home. In fact, it has some very different physical characteristics. And one of the characteristics you'll be interested in is that it's deuterium depleted. And deuterium happens to be an isotope of hydrogen, okay? And there's two forms of it. And the only difference is that that hydrogen is double the atomic weight. Well, the way it interacts with light is radically different than other forms of like light hydrogen. And it turns out our mitochondria really like that version of it. Turns out our blood plasma, we have lots of deuterium. In fact, it's 150 parts per million in our blood plasma. So when you see this seemingly counterintuitive conundrum, you have to decide for yourself, why would nature build us this way? And believe it or not, it comes back to this story about EMS. It turns out that visible spectrum of light is the one part of the spectrum that our system's tuned to make water. And that's what your redox potential in your body is tied to. And when people ask me the next question, Jack, tell me what redox potential is. Well, it's pretty simple. It's the net negative charge in the cell, but it's that and a whole lot more. It's actually cytochrome 1, NAD. It's the amount of oxygen in the system, which gets back to the first point that I made to you, that the voltage gated channels alter the ROS, meaning the reactive oxygen species. Well, it turns out mitochondria can do that by raising and lowering the amount of oxygen they need. And how does this process happen simply? Most of your listeners, even if they're not science geeks like that I am, they've probably heard of the big metabolic pathways in a cell. TCA cycle, or the Krebs cycle, the urea cycle for protein, then you have glycolysis for glucose, and then you have the PPP, which is the pentose phosphate pathway. And if you haven't heard of it, it doesn't matter. But what you need to know, the last two, glycolysis and the PPP, are a big deal for EMF, because it turns out, guess what we found from Alan Fry in the 1960s? What did we find out from Nora Volkow in 2011? That anytime we put a cell phone or an electromagnetic antenna, either an RF or microwave, it increases the AMPK pathways, which means you have to use glycolysis. So that tells you that light is capable of forcing us to use certain pathways in our body that we normally wouldn't do. Because most of us know to be optimal for a human, you really need to spend most of your time using the TCA and urea cycle. Turns out those two cycles need high oxygen tensions to work. Okay, glycolysis and the PPP need lower oxygen tension levels, and they need glucose as the fuel. Well, everybody knows we want to fat burn. That's part of the reason why fat burning leads to usually good things in health. Well, it turns out, what's the real problem with EMF? You lose the ability to undergo beta oxidation, and you have to default to older evolutionary systems for biosynthesis. And to be quite frank with you, those systems can go awry much easier than the other systems that we're built to use. So when people tell you that EMFs have no biologic effect, you have to realize most of those people are looking at thermal effects. Thermal effects really, and I don't want to minimize them, it's just the wrong stone to try to examine EMFs. And believe it or not, I'm actually surprised we're going to go into this, but it's important. Mm-hmm. Actually, heat does have a huge effect on EMF. And the reason why, heat affects the hydrogen bonding network actually in your body. And it turns out mitochondria release heat. Well, they do that for a reason. And the reason why, it actually helps the fractionation to keep the deuterium in your blood and actually keep the hydrogen where it's supposed to be in the matrix, where the TCA cycle and the urea cycle meet. So from my perspective, when you ask me this, especially in a summit like this where people are kind of getting interested in the topic, I want them to focus in on the number one top thing. And believe it or not, the number one top thing, EMFs really handle protons in our body. And to scale this from my level to a level that I think most of your people will understand, everybody's heard the word inflammation. What people forget is inflammation is actually molecular chaos. That's another level. And let's take it to the level that most people know. Inflammation is basically related to a pH log scale. What does pH measure? Protons. So we're back to my level again. And people don't think about this in this fashion. So effectively, when I tell somebody, they come to me with a bunch of labs and there's a problem, and it actually happened this morning before I got on talking to you, one of the members on my site. He posted all these labs and he expected me to regurgitate, what a functional medicine doctor would do, or even an allopathic doctor. And to be quite frank with you, if you don't know what you're looking for in labs, there's no way you're going to find the problems in your environment. And it turns out we're not born with the defects. Very few of us are. Mm-hmm. We have created environmental defects that cause the problem. And it turns out that EMFs are the single number one thing that it's tied to. And the problem is people don't look at the sun the way you and I look at EMS, because guess what? The sun is an EMF, but it's a native one. It's the one we're optimized to. It's the one that we need to pay attention to. And that's why right before we got on the call, we were having a little chat. And I said to you, and your face actually was classic when I said it, I said, look, I'm always railing on people about dogma and that how you need to get rid of it. But what did I say to you? I said, the dogma that I have when I teach people about EMFs is that we need to have a cognitive bias towards nature, because that is the EMF that we work with. And my opinion on this may be different than yours, but I'll share it with you. I think if you teach people first what normal is with EMFs and how it works with mitochondria, then I think learning about the abnormal becomes much easier. I think if you start in on the deep tank with EMFs and you don't have a basic understanding of biology or chemistry or in physics, and to be quite frank with you, I don't think you need, the education. I think my education in this story was a hindrance to me actually learning it. I think people who come to this that have no background don't have any dogma that they have to put to bed. And that I think that opinion from my standpoint is probably different than most people, because most people think that you have to know a lot to do this. And I always point out to my members on my site, look, lions and hippos don't know quantum physics, so why the hell should you have to? What they do is they don't have a brain in their head that allows them to break all of nature's laws, and we do. And that simple little fact is the reason why we have created this problem.
We try to outsmart nature.
Correct. And it's a mistake. And the thing is, I'm not trying to tell people that all technology is horrendous, but we need to realize everything in biology has a poison and an anti-poison. And for example, when we started this podcast off, I told you that blue light is the biggest non-native EMF risk for humans. That's going to change when 5G comes. I think 5G is going to trump it because it's going to augment all the other effects. But here's the crazy part. Everybody knows that blue light is present in the sun, but it's never present when red light's not there. That's the key issue. See, blue light has amazing effects. It actually turns on your pituitary gland in the morning. That's where it is now. I see the sunrise every morning. I haven't missed it in 15 years since that issue happened with my knee. And it turns out that blue light is beneficial, but it's always with red, and it's got to the filter through the eye and the skin have to be congruent. So, for example, if I was doing this podcast with you, like you are now inside, and I'm outside, why am I not wearing my blue blockers? Well, believe it or not, they're sitting on my rocking chair right next to me, but I'm outside and I'm getting all these frequencies. And a lot of these frequencies, my eye is blind to, but believe it or not, my mitochondria is not. It responds to every EMF in the electromagnetic spectrum, from the lowest to the highest. And its response is really what I guess this summit is all about.
Yeah. You said a lot there, which I'd like to come back on points of it, but I'm fascinated when you say cognitive bias on nature. So can you develop on that?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I want you to think about this like this simple process. I want you to think about your laptop or my laptop. It's a piece of hardware. It can do some amazing things, but it can do nothing without the software that runs it. Turns out, nature is the software that runs our cells, our tissues, all the different organs in your body that you've probably learned a little bit about in your entire life. And the thing is, you have to have an operating system in order to make the hardware operational. And I guess the easiest way to understand EMFs, if you don't want to dive in deep, is technology provides alternative spectrums that ruin the software's ability to run the hardware. That's really what it comes down to. And the bias that you need to have is towards understanding why the sun and why nighttime is paramount. Why circadian biology trumps everything. Anybody who tells you food matters more than circadian biology, you should just literally hang up and not talk to them anymore, because these are people that don't have your best interests at heart. Why? Because they're now trying to make a totally different story. They're looking under a different stone, and it turns out that's not how it is. And the way I try to explain that to my members, and you may appreciate this, I go back to a very common example. Let's take a Ferrari. Lloyd and I go out and buy a Ferrari, and we know that it can go 225 miles per hour, really fast. Do you think, whether it was in Lloyd's country or my country, it would make a difference if we put low-octane gas or high-octane gas when we first get it from the factory? The answer is no. But you know what does matter? What if Lloyd turned the screws of the electronic or the carburetor and it didn't work like it's supposed to? In other words, the engine is more important than the fuel source. And you know the problem is? Because people are more easily to understand diet, macronutrients, and things like that. That's what they focus in on. Just because a bunch of idiots do one thing doesn't mean you should. If you get the wisdom of nature, all of a sudden you start to go, maybe I need to focus a little bit more on the engine and less on the bullshit from the food gurus or the doctors, because it makes a lot more sense. And it turns out with EMFs, it's a really big deal, because guess what? When you're in and around electromagnetic fields, it handles or changes the way you can handle macronutrients. And what was the point that I made to you about Volkow and Fry? That data has been published for a long time, but nobody seems to realize it. I mean, it's staring at you right in the face that non-native EMF causes you to have to use glucose, and you can't use fats for beta oxidation. Then you also can't use proteins like you normally would do. Well, then all of a sudden it starts to make sense why you go in the anti-aging literature and you see all this nonsense about, well, people who get cancer older, they have problems with mTOR or IGF-1. Why? Well, guess what? The older you get, the more sensitive you are to non-native EMF. The corollary to that is, Lloyd, means the more sun you need, the older you get. Why? To make water. Because what does water effectively do? Again, another thing tied to EMF. It's a Faraday cage to protect the interior of the cell. Like sorry about that. All the gear shifts that are in your cells to spin have to have that Faraday effect in there, along with deuterium depletion. And it turns out as we age, we allow more of that deuterium in, and it slows the flywheels, just like it does if Lloyd was to put Aunt Jemima maple syrup into the Ferrari engine. We wouldn't do that, with the car that we just spent $250,000 on. But people don't realize that every time they put the cell phone up to the side of their head, that's effectively what they're doing. And you have to get these people to that level to understand why it's an issue, because then you also have the other idiots, like in my country, like the FCC and everybody else, who tells people that there's no effects. I just had somebody on my Facebook page the other day trying to tell me, well, my husband's an electrical engineer. He works for the big, for Motorola. And she's trying to convince me. I'm like, sweetheart, just give your husband Andrew Marino's book, Going Somewhere. Yes. Anybody who's a skeptic needs to be handed that book, and immediately within the first 100 pages, you'll realize that EMFs don't need any thermal effects at all. In fact, they change the way electrons and protons act everywhere in the universe. And it turns out they have to act a very specific way in our mitochondria. So that's where my bias to nature comes from.
EMFs affect everything,
yes.
Which is really pretty much sums it up, actually. And that's why EMFs are the center of my world and has become important to me. I have a very different background to you, but it was similar in a way, I guess, because I had this reaction. With you, it was through your work, through the blue light. With me, it was just boom. One day, got this terrible reaction to my cell phone. Wondered what the hell was going on, and began down this path of discovering just what EMFs were. Facing the beast, because obviously it's pretty scary. When your health is affected, it's pretty scary. But when it's this thing, electromagnetic fields, which nobody seems to know about, above all doctors,
they've been marginalized. They've been marginalized because we have to realize that this industry, the tech industry, especially in my country, we completely moved from an agricultural economy to a technology economy. Really, it started in the 40s and 50s, but now our country's dominated by it. But the irony is, I see the tide starting to turn, because now people are starting to realize, like, how blue screens, how tech companies like Facebook and LinkedIn and all those are causing problems for people. You know what the real problem for me is, Lloyd, that's probably a little bit different than you? Every disease that somebody comes to me with, I can actually explain it from an EMF context. And I think that's what people are really interested in, because they want to know how Hashimoto's disease, which in 1986, when I was in medical school, in my textbook said it only makes up 1% of hypothyroid cases. Today, it makes up 99%. So if you believe that Darwin was right, that should be physically impossible. Well, it turns out it's not impossible, because in 1986, we didn't know about melanopsin. We didn't know that it's in the eye, and it's also in the skin. And guess what? In 1998, we found out it was in the eye. Guess when we found out it was in the skin? 2017. Last year.
Yeah.
Guess what? If you want to know why all these things now are happening, because now in 2018, we're all using blue screens. No one's using eye protection, but no one realized that protecting their skin from non-AV EMF is also a big deal. And like your cell phone that you have, my belief is the RF and microwave fields are bad, but you know what originally started your problem was the freaking blue screen. That's the real problem, because that's the number one of how your circadian mechanism is built. And once you lower the redox potential, in other words, like go back to the Ferrari now. The battery now is lowered. The car still turns on. There's a street sweeper going by. The car still turns on for Lloyd, but the power antennas and the power windows don't go on. And see, the thing is, all of us assume as we age, well, that's kind of normal. Well, it turns out that's not the case. And that's how you develop electromagnetic hypersensitivity, because for it to be present, by definition, you have to have a lowered redox potential. And these links that I make on the biology side then makes you realize, hey, physics really dictates everything that happens in biology. And we don't really realize it yet. And there's a coming age in medicine, coming age in science called quantum biology. And I think, in my opinion, this is, again, my bias, I think the best way to learn about EMS is actually from the quantum biologic focus. And the reason why, if you have a disease or you have an illness that you're trying to overcome, you are more invested in yourself. And the thing is, when you go to enough doctors, no matter what country you're in, they don't have these answers. And the thing is, these are the answers that patients need, that the public wants. And that's part of the reason why I've kind of smirked and laughed at all my critics and skeptics, because they thought, just like you said to me before we started, Jack, the stuff you write is pretty high level stuff. It is, but you know, the application of what I teach people is pretty simple. Get outside, take your clothes off, take your shoes off, and spend time in the sun, more time in the sun than you do on your devices, because really, I personally think we all need technology diets. And remember, everything in technology has to plug into the power grid. If you ask me after blue light, before 5G comes, I think the power grid is the second biggest problem, because everything plugs into it. Then I think the third biggest problem is we've gone from a 0G world to now we're in a 5G world. When people, and to really understand the defects in 5G, you have to know a lot about quantum mechanics and physics. Most of the people who I think are experts, they're experts in their own mind only. It's amazing. It's amazing to me every day how much I learn about what engineers are doing to electromagnetic waves to bring 5G to obedient idiots that want to watch Netflix faster. It just is shocking what they're doing. Yes. And when you compare that to what's happening, say, on the surface of our sun, and you understand the spectrum that comes to us, you see a radical disconnect. And some of the stuff with 5G that I want people to be aware of, and most of your people probably have never heard of this, it induces topologic effects. And those topologic effects are things that occur on the surface. That's your eye, your skin, your gut, your lungs. But most people don't know this. In 2016, topologic sciences, or the topologic insulators, were given the Nobel Prize. And I told my members in 2012, I did webinars about what's inside of our cells. The things that interact with light frequencies are called topologic insulators. In fact, every protein in your body is a diode semiconductor. It absorbs electrical energy and magnetic energy and re-emits something else. And the body uses that actually to signal. Anything that we put in to the system that is non-biologic actually causes interference pattern. And it's really easy to understand. If you ever go out to the ocean and you see two waves collide, well, that leads to a different effect than when the waves just keep coming into the shore. And to be quite honest with you, when you understand really network 4G, 5G, 2G, you begin to understand why people do better in certain places. Like they think when they go on vacation that it's better. It turns out, no, that's not really the reason. They're spending more time outdoors in nature and less time connected to the shit that's making them sick. But everybody thinks, oh no, it's because I was de-stressed. People don't realize when we talk about stress, whether it's emotional, biochemical, mental, physical, it all gets mediated through the brainstem through a nucleus called the paraventricular nucleus. What's the fifth effect of EMS? It actually raises the firing of the paraventricular nucleus and decreases the vagal motor nucleus, which controls the parasympathetic side of things. So it stresses. There's a chronic stress response in the body. What does that lead to? Higher ROS, where? Back in the mitochondria. Where does that come from? Mitochondria gets too much deuterium in it, and when deuterium gets pressurized by electric and magnetic fields, you know what happens? It releases extreme low frequency UV light and releases way too much of it. See, we're designed to release very little of it, okay? And for example, prokaryotes or archaea, the other two kingdoms of life, because we're eukaryotes, they release 5,000 times more light from their cells than we do. And the reason why we do that, Lloyd, is we are creatures of light. We are designed to keep our light inside, and our system is completely built around that issue. When we get sick, our mitochondria emit light they should not emit, and we are losing light energy. And remember, we can carry more energy and information in light waves than anything on this planet, okay? And your body is tuned into doing exactly that. When you use things that man has built that use light waves, it diminishes that capacity.
Mm-hmm. So, if we can just explore the 5G a little bit, because I know this is concerns a lot of people.
Oh, shit.
5G, millimeter waves. We're talking about all kinds of frequencies, but way higher frequencies than we use at the moment. We don't know exactly, but we're talking maybe 30, 50, 60 gigahertz or more.
The range goes 24 to 90 gigahertz. Here's the real problem. 5G can actually be done below 24 gigahertz, and believe it or not, in the States, it's already being used. It's been used in airports, in certain airports in certain cities in our country for over 15 or 20 years already. So if you happen to live around one of those areas, you're in deep shit. Almost all first responders use 5G and been using 5G. Airline pilots use 5G already. Here's the thing that people don't know.
So how do they use 5G already?
Because it's on the tetra frequency. There is another frequency that's just for first responders. Well, it turns out governments.
Yes.
Remember, we all need to understand this. How is the spectrum licensed in our country, meaning the USA? The Federal Communications Commission licenses certain parts of the spectrum to be used for certain things, and that's what corporations do. The big issue with 5G is in our country, the military. This all started back when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we didn't have radar detectors up. They were up a month later. That's when everything for non-native EMF really has escalated since that point. Why? Because now the military uses it for dramatic reasons. That's the reason why it's not going away. And that's why people have to learn how to mitigate it.
Yes.
Then it turned out we also used and rebuilt our entire economy around technology. So these are why this is such a big area. And you need to realize that there's no running away from it. But if you understand it, and this is why I try to interrupt you a little bit earlier about 5G, it's not just about the frequency. The one thing I hope this summit gets out, what electrical engineers are doing right now to allow 5G to do the things that it can do, they are actually changing the wave fronts of the waves as they move. And this is going to destroy the topology of how we're built. And see, these guys are good with light waves, but they don't know shit about biology. And it turns out that this is the reason why I teach people from my side of things, because when you begin to understand the basics of truly how a cell works, then you begin to really get the impact of why 5G is a problem. And let me tell you the other reason why 5G is a big issue. And I don't know how much of this you know, but right now it costs $100,000 to buy say a trimeter, like people use for a regular EMF, to go the spectrum between 24 and 90 gigahertz. Most people can't afford that. I actually tried to buy one. It cost me $118,000 so that I could go in and hack things that I'm interested in hacking, because I'm a big hacker. Well, it turns out that one of the things that I found is that having a tool like that is not going to be good enough in a 5G network. Not only that, it also means that every carrier like Telstra and Verizon and Vodafone are going to engineer their forms of 5G, and 5G is going to be the most heterogeneous part of the spectrum that's ever been unleashed on humans. So you know what that means? That means people in your zip code and people in my zip code are going to get radically different problems, but everybody's going to say, oh, it's 5G. And then the industry is going to use that and say, well, let's study this in a randomized controlled clinical trial. You'll never see the effect. Why? Because light works non-linear. It means small stimulus leads to a massive amplification in mitochondrial biology. Well, they're banking on this. And you, through this summit, need to teach people that 5G is not going to be easy to understand, even for people who think they know. I can tell you I've been warning my people for probably almost 3 years. And I've made predictions in my blogs and my webinars, in the things that you can't find online unless you're a Patreon member. And here's the crazy thing, Lloyd. In 2017 and 2018, I did a blog. I'm sorry, it was a webinar in April of 2016. And I think if anybody who's listening to this is interested, you go back and listen to it. It will absolutely blow you away with the depth of the physics that are in it. It's 3 hours of me basically going as deep can be, but I made predictions in that blog or the webinar. And already, I think about 17 have come true. And why am I concerned? I think 5G is going to be the biggest assault on the human race that we've ever seen. And I think most of the collateral damage that comes from it, that's going to show up in doctors' offices and emergency rooms, people will have no way to connect the dots back to the use of their device as the cause of their problem. So my goal is not to worry about the 7.5 billion obedient idiots in the world. I'm interested in doing summits like this with guys like you, because I believe if we can get 70 to 100,000 people in every continent awake to understand what they need to do and how to protect their cells properly and understand what's coming. In other words, I want you to be proactive, not reactive. And the problem is most people, especially in the EMF world, the supposed experts, they're really focusing more on the reactionary side. I want people to be proactive. And unfortunately, Lloyd, to be proactive, that means that you have to have an understanding and wisdom of actually what EMFs are capable of doing. And therein lies the reason why Jack is a very difficult plate to swallow. But it gives you the perspective, so you understand where I'm coming from.
So understanding this knowledge, this wisdom, gaining this wisdom, I think you're saying it's not a 5-minute thing. It requires a little bit of work. But at the same time, there is a paradox here, because at the same time I do get a deep sense of what you're saying. I'm reading in between the lines is that actually this is like brain dead simple, really, because we don't really need, we can understand this at an intuitive level. So people that are listening that are feeling a bit blinded by science, I can assure you I am too, a little bit, because this is, some of it's unfamiliar to me. But there is, I think, on a very intuitive level, we can understand. It's really simple. It's very, very simple, is it not?
When you say intuitive, I know how you're taking it, but I'm gonna throw my 2 cents here and tell you what intuition is to me. It's the 5 senses that you all know, and then the 6th sense is your mitochondrial sense. And intuition is built by those senses absorbing waves from your environment. That's where it comes from. And it turns out that's exactly how a quantum computer works. Okay. And your brain is a quantum computer, and it is making sense of all the chaos around you. And it turns out your brain recapitulates reality. It also builds time, and it uses all the waveforms around us to do it. And we fundamentally have to realize that 5G, like X-rays, like cosmic rays, like microwaves, when it's the dominant EMF in your life, shortens your longevity and lifespan. And it's going to do it in a variety of different ways. The thing is, we just need people to get that awareness. And my personal belief is if you truly become what I call a black swan mitochondria, the credo that I teach people is things that are difficult are our mark. That's what we do. Why? Because when you understand really how a mitochondria works, understanding EMFs is 3rd grade level. It really, it's not difficult. And I do think for people who want to come to this probably from your way, I think the book that I said earlier, Andrew Marino's book, is a freaking phenomenal book. The way
I've read that book. It's excellent.
Right. The way I came to this, as I told you before, is through an injury through myself. And of course, since I'm a neurosurgeon, I'm always interested in disease angles. When I realized that just about every disease that I see in my clinic is tied to non-native EMF, that's when I guess what? I need to know a lot more about physics. When I started this out, my friend, most people are listening to this going, well, Jack knows all this science. Well, Jack didn't know shit in 2004, 2005, because I didn't have it. We don't learn that much physics to become a doctor. You only learn basic, force equals mass times acceleration, like Newton's crap. Well, it turns out when I realized that light was getting me sick, and I realized that mitochondria only deal with electrons and protons, I asked myself one question. How much do I know about electrons and protons? And how much do I really know about light? And you know what, Lloyd? The answer was not a lot. And so what did I do? I did what any kid born in the 1960s like me would do. I went to the library, and guess what I did? I learned everything that we talked about heretofore today was not really in Jack's head. Now, I will tell you, the connections to biology, those were in my head. Why? I happen to be really good at the biology side. That's part of, being a doctor and all that. But the problem is the things that I was taught about biology, it was never connected back to the fabric of nature. And I'm going to tell you, anything that's disconnected from the fabric of nature means that it's a half truth.
Yeah.
And anytime you have a half truth, you're liable to make a huge mistake. Mm-hmm. This is the reason why for this series that you're doing, why I wanted to participate. Another street sweeper.
Yeah, I can hear him. Okay, well, wait a sec.
Why I wanted to participate is because I think that people need to understand this perspective well. And I think there are three ways to tackle it. You can come at it from the chemistry side, you can come at it from the physics side, or you can come out from the biology side. But I personally think the biology side is easier, not because I happen to know that side well. It's because all of us are human. And all of us are invested in our own health. And if you're one of the people that just say, hey, look, I'm going to go to the doctor when I'm sick and it's up to them to fix it, then you know what? Turn this seminar series off. Never become a member of my site because you're not the target audience. The target audience for me is people that have their skin in the game and they want to know. And here's the thing, Lloyd, when you start to teach people the little bits, they start going, this is kind of interesting. I want to learn more about that. That's it. That's all it takes. To be a true blue mitochondriac and a person that really understands non-native EMF, all you have to do is be curious. That's it. You have to get your curious, that original mindset you had when you were in 3rd and 4th grade, when you didn't know something. Like when you're sitting in the car and you said to your parents, why do we have painted lines on the ground? Why do we do this? The classic 5 to 6 year old kid that asks why about everything. I want to see 40 and 50 and 60 and 70-year-old humans do the same thing.
Yes. Then
I think you'll begin to understand why my site exists, because I love questions. I love the tough ones, and I love the counterintuitive ones, because I personally believe the more of this, the bits of the pieces that the easier EMFs become to understand. It's kind of like when you have a vase and you drop it on the ground and it's in 10,000 pieces. What we're effectively trying to do through this summit is to see how the pieces fit. So when you get enough of them together, you say, that looks like it may have been a vase. That's how you teach people. And the more pieces that fit in, they start to go, this is starting to make a lot of sense. Now I understand why Jack thinks Alzheimer's disease comes from blue light toxicity, or why Hashimoto's disease comes from blue light exposure on your thyroid gland. Or now I know why Jack doesn't put the cell phone up to the side of his head and why he's got a blue light screen on it and why he never keeps it on his body. All of a sudden I'm not crazy, and I'll tell you, when I started this on the internet 12 years ago, people used to call me a crazy mofo. All the time. I got it all the time. And the funny thing is, every year we go forward, I get less and less crazy. Why? Because now the science is out there backing me up. And this is the point that I like to make to guys like you and the people that are going to listen to the summit. Well, that means that the answers had to be in the books and the papers that Jack read in 2004 and 2005. So some of the things that we said today, you can go back and read Alan Fry's work in the 60s, or Robert O. Becker's work, or Marino's work. And the thing is, when you see it and how long it's been present, how long have we known this? We have known this all the way back to the 1950s, that non-native use of the electromagnetic spectrum is a problem in biology. That's part of the reason why Russia doesn't have Facebook. It's part of the reason why Russia doesn't have Microsoft. It's part of the reason Russia doesn't have Google. Their government took it way more serious than we did. Why? We built a freaking economy around it. And the thing is, 360 million people in my country are now the largest ongoing randomized controlled clinical trial on EMF that has ever been done. And, the problem is we've got all these stupid people, and I mean stupid, on the internet trying to tell people, well, if you eat a paleo diet or you're a carnivore diet or, you eat my autoimmune protocol, you're going to do – no. You need to understand how non-native EMF causes these problems. Not where you thought you were going to go, huh?
No, I'm fine because, I've always, there was a time when I was reading the EMF literature, and it was like every day I was discovering that, well, in fact, EMFs are behind that, and they're behind this, and they're behind that. And now they've done a study, and it's Alzheimer's, and it's Parkinson's, and so what I know intuitively, again, because I'm a big intuitive, is that EMFs are behind, your flu symptoms. They're behind your earache. They're behind your runny nose. They're behind the pain in your knee. And I'm not saying they're necessarily the cause, but
I am saying
a contributing factor.
See, I'm going to take it the next step.
Okay,
it is
please do.
No, it is the problem.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, it is the cause.
Yeah.
Anything that's
not the sole cause.
I'm going to tell you, anything that's outside of 250 to 780 nanometer light, with the exception of the Schumann resonance, which is extreme low frequency, those are the two EMFs in the spectrum that cells work with. If you have any other, you just lowered your redox. So I'm going to tell you that leads to aging. It leads to every disease on the planet. In fact, one of the guys, probably the world expert in mitochondrial medicine, his name is Dr. Doug Wallace. He's at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Yeah. He has been on record on his videos on YouTube. He said that he believes 75 to 80% of human diseases are caused from a mitochondrial basis. After reading every paper this man has ever written over the last 40 years, I'm going to tell you my belief is that it's probably 98 to 99%. I think I leave 1 or 2% out because there are true genetic diseases, but I'm finding out even in those genetic diseases that non-native EMF plays a huge role. It turns out that the eggs that these kids came from, the germline, was affected by non-native EMF. So effectively, the number is really 100%. You know what the problem is, Lloyd? The problem is the people who control medicine and biology don't have the insight that I do. They don't have the wisdom of nature to actually look at the problem the way I look at it. They look at it the way they were taught. And they don't realize the way they were taught doesn't allow them to see the angle that I'm trying to share with you now.
Yes.
Because really, I want you to understand, and your people that do this summit, to understand why the mitochondriac prescription, the optic, is different. And that's the reason why I personally think it's the best way to learn about this, because you'll understand it a lot better. You don't need, just like I said before, you can be a lion or a hippo. It's amazing to me. Lions, hippos, and kangaroos, they all know when to get out of the sun. There's no freaking book out there that says, hey, kangaroo, it's now 11 a.m. and to 2:30, you may want to stay out of the most powerful UV light. They know what to do. They start licking their arms to cool their blood, and they go under a tree. It's amazing to me that we have to teach people how to eat. Humans with brains. It's shocking. Sharks don't have a problem with that. And I think that's what we need to really teach people, is that when we get them back in nature, all of a sudden, all the problems that you thought you had start to vanish. And then you start to wake up to this mindset that, hey, you know what? It may be that this is a big issue, a lot bigger than we're willing to do. And I know most guys on the internet do exactly what you just said to me. Oh, well, I think it's a contributing factor, because if you go all in like I did, then you get branded as a crazy SOB. And I'm telling you, I don't mind being called that, because if you see how much time and effort that I have put into this, and trust me, I follow the data. I don't follow my beliefs. In fact, everything that I learned I can tell you I know is wrong. The interesting thing is it's still useful because now I can see how the pieces fit. And the really interesting thing about being a doctor, one big advantage I have over everybody watching this is that I see how the pieces fall apart. And when you see how they fall apart and they go together, all of a sudden understanding this becomes way easier. And I think it makes me a good teacher of this. When most people come to my stuff, like you said, it could be a little bit overwhelming in the beginning because it's like drinking out of a fire hose. But if you stick with it for 4 to 6 weeks and you see the basics manifest, you're going to go, this really isn't that hard to get. And then you start realizing, okay, I got how this works here and I got how this works here. And if you're paying attention, you're going to start asking questions to Jack. And then you're going to get very targeted answers. They're going to take you down another rabbit hole and you say, so that's the reason why red light actually helps people outside of the sun. Oh, okay, I got this now. And you begin to put the pieces together. And like I said, you may not have to know it as well as I know it, and that's fine. The main thing that you have to do is you have a job to you and yourself only. And until you can protect yourself from what the government and the military are putting around you, you're a moron. It's as simple as that. And, people don't like my bluntness. And I tell people all the time, my mouth is not a bakery for EMF. It's not. I'm going to tell you the unadulterated truth. I'm going to give you my expert opinion. And I tell you and tell everybody listening to this exactly what I tell anybody else. Don't believe a word I told you today. But I'm going to show you where my ideas came from. Then you tell me if I'm wrong. Or maybe if everybody else is looking under the wrong rock, wanting to blame fructose and glucose and GMOs and all this other bullshit that people are talking about. It turns out the environment that we live in changes. People don't even realize the seasons are seasonal EMFs. We have seasons. Yeah. Those are EMFs, and people don't realize it. For example, you're in the Southern Hemisphere, correct? Mm-hmm. All right. So you got winter coming. I'm coming into summer. I'm going to give you a very...
I'm coming into summer as well. I beg your pardon. I'm in France.
Oh, okay. So I thought you were in the Southern Hemisphere.
Northern Hemisphere.
All right. So just think about somebody who's in the Southern Hemisphere. I'll make believe that you're in Australia right now. What I would tell you is the blue light in the sun there in the Southern Hemisphere right now is about 13%. You know what it is here in New Orleans? 26%. So guess what? That tells you something about how the sun operates. Not only does it change diurnally, like in the morning, it's 1600 Kelvin, and at sunset, it's 16,000 Kelvin. So there's a diurnal change of blue light that's more regular, but then there's a seasonal change. And believe it or not, there's even minute-to-minute changes. And me sitting out here right now looking at this clear blue sky, my eyes and my skin are getting that benefit, and I'm offsetting it from how I'm talking to you. That's part of the reason why I'm doing this outside early in the morning. Why? One of the things I learned about EMF is that there is the single number one most important thing for everybody to do is you have to be outside at the transition of infrared light to UVA light. And it turns out that changes everywhere you are on the planet. And the morning is the single most important time for you. You have to see a sunrise. And one of the things that I realized in 2004, the reason why my knee meniscus tore, prior to that time as a neurosurgeon, my training in medical school, I had maybe seen 20 sunrises in my life. And I was like, this can't be this simple. I said, this is the reason why the monks go up on the top of the mountain and they sit in front of the sun and they get tan at, 20,000 feet. And they can do it far away from the equator. I started to realize these guys are tapping into nature and don't even realize what they're doing. They got a whole bunch of other mumbo jumbo, they call it, but it's circadian biology 101. And when I started to realize it myself, I said, you know what? I need to teach everybody circadian biology, and then the EMF stuff will just follow. And that's really the single most important thing for everybody to mitigate. Why? Remember we started this whole thing off. The sun makes water. Water protects you from every other non-native EMF. I can't stress that strongly enough. If you're dehydrated, you are on your path to getting sick. And all EMFs, with the exception of the Schumann resonance and 250 to 780 nanometer light from the sun, dehydrate you. That's the reason why the visible part of the spectrum is different than the rest. That's why I have a cognitive bias to nature.
So, if we could, we're getting towards the end here. We're running out of time. But if you could give, like, what Dr. Jack, his tips for EMF protection, for avoiding EMFs and for optimum health.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I'm going to tell you, use the inverse square law. You need to learn about it. It's not that hard to do. Then the next step to make the practical applications, I already told you one. Sunrises, it's non-negotiable. Like if you're a member of my site and you're not willing to do that first step, I'll cut you like a bad disease, whether you're paying me or not.
So you're actually saying to see the sun rise from the earth, literally.
Literally.
6 a.m., 5 a.m., 4 a.m.,
whatever it happens, go find the sun. And the longer you stay there, the better it is for you, okay? The second thing I would tell you is make sure you stay hydrated. Try to drink water, good water. That means unfluoridated water. The best type of water, for those of you who may not know, water that comes from the poles is better than equator water. Why? It has to do with deuterium. If you want to know more, come to my site and I'll teach you about it. But that's the best water to mitigate EMFs. Then the single best thing is look at the obedient idiots around you. If you happen to live in a city that has 16 million obedient idiots that like Facebook and LinkedIn and everything else, Twitter, move. Why? Because you can't mitigate their stupidity. You can only mitigate your own. So population density is a huge one. I don't think you should be living anywhere where you're on top of your neighbors. Why? Because they're going to have smart meters. They're going to have all smart devices connected to this 5G network, the Internet of Things, and it's going to get worse in a 5G world. So I want you to live lower population density. Something that's changed in me recently, you may not know this, but I'm building something called the Cruz Longevity Farm, which is going to be an institute where I take care of certain patients and also train doctors in what I've learned. And we're currently constructing it right now on the North Shore of Louisiana and in Slidell. And we've gone through 6 different iterations of how we're mitigating from a building biology perspective. And I used to think that I knew a lot about this about 6 months ago. What I've learned in building this farm, I now have metal roofs over everything that I'm building. I also have lead line walls because it was the only thing when I brought 5G out there that actually was blocked. Reinforced concrete. These are the things that are coming. I hate to say this, but you live probably in a part of France where digging a hole in the ground and making an earthen house is probably not a bad idea. If you happen to live, like say if you lived in the middle of Paris or London, as soon as 5G goes live and you start getting ill, believe me, people will begin to start to do some of these things because electrosensitive, you have to do extraordinary things. I have a member that maybe we'll close with because you'll appreciate it. She lives in London. Her name is Sarah, and she's extremely electrosensitive because of the 50 hertz power grid that you guys have over there. And when I came and did a biohacking event in 2015 in London, I met her and I told her, I said, Sarah, if you come to Mexico to my members event, I will guarantee you I'll teach you all you need to know about EMS in one trip. And she's like, wait, you're going to tell me that I'm going to go to a resort with EMF in it and I'm going to actually get better? I said, yes, that's what I'm telling you. And I didn't tell her any reasons why or this and that. So she came 3 days, her electromagnetic hypersensitivity went away. And she was like, this is amazing. And I just told her, I said, your reset button happens to be, and when I say your, I'm talking yours too, Lloyd, and everybody listening to this, eukaryotes on this planet, their reset button is the Yucatan Peninsula. Is the Yucatan Peninsula. You need to be there, okay, as much as possible to get better. Now, the reasons why, I'm not going to go into. But that is the single best thing that one can do when one is really sick to get better. And the more time you spend there, to build your redox back up, the better off you'll be.
Practical question on getting up at with sunrise. Does that mean we go to bed at sunset? How do you do that in a practical sense?
Well, that's what I do is then I teach people about melanopsin. In fact, in 5 days, I'm going to Vermont to give my third talk to that group. The last talk last year was about the eye. This year is about the skin. Turns out that not only do you have to have, here, I'll show them to you, these glasses. Mm-hmm. These are Raw Optics blue blocking glasses that block all the blue and green. You also have to keep your skin as covered as possible. So my standard joke with my Southern patients is I tell them I want them as naked as jaybirds when the sun's out, but I want them completely covered if they happen to go out and have dinner. And last night I went out to dinner with some of my friends that are in town from out of town, and they remarked, because it was warm here, it's pretty hot. Why are you wearing all these clothes? Why don't you have your skin exposed and this and that? And I explained to them, you would have seen me when the sun was out. I had just about nothing on. And we need to get that message to people. So I don't think you have to go to bed when the sun sets. I mean, from a circadian biology standpoint, would it be optimal? It would. I don't think it's realistic. But if you're going to use lights at night, I think your first best choice, and this is going to shock you when I say it, is an incandescent bulb.
I'm not shocked.
Well, the second best one is probably fire. And believe it or not, the reason I elevate fire over the incandescent for one reason is even with incandescents, you get some flickering effect when it's plugged into the grid, and that does affect the brain. But if we could eliminate flicker from an incandescent bulb, I think an incandescent bulb, if we just move back to that bulb, we could actually save people a lot of disease. And the problem is my government, at least, has outlawed those bulbs. You can still get them in specialty stores, but everybody's trying to go to LED and fluorescence because they save energy, but they also make us sicker. So did they really save us money and energy, or have they cost us a ton? That's the problem.
Well,
that's what the summit's about, right? It's about...
Exactly. And, so this is an inconvenient truth, and we do need to face these truths. And obviously, truth is a word which there's truths and half truths, and But so it's an inconvenient truth. We can put it like this: that's to say, this information that Dr. Jack has shared with us, it's not what you find everywhere, and it's a little bit more. So we're pushing the boundaries a bit. Let's put it like that. But I want to say thank you for sharing this. Thank you for your work over the years. Your website is amazing. It's an amazing resource. Honestly, I encourage people to go there. If you could just remind us what the URL is of your website, please.
Yeah, it's my name, www.jackcruse.com. And I also, my new work mostly on EMFs, especially 5G, and all the hacks that I've been doing is on my Patreon blog. You have to be a member to do that. It's www.patreon, patreon.com/Dr. Jack Cruse, no spaces. In there, you'll see some of the cutting edge stuff that I've done on 5G hacks. These are things that I'm making predictions. What is going to happen to people when 5G goes live through all the testing that I've done. And I think you'd find it extremely interesting. The single best test to follow risks for EMF. Most people will find that very, very interesting. These are things Lloyd, here's probably the number one thing I'll say. If people really want to know how much you care, or how much you know, they have to see how much you care. And when you make predictions, it tells you a little bit about the theory. It tells you that when your predictions start coming true, there may be a lot more to this than meets the eye. And I just want people to stop believing the nonsense that we've all been fed for a really long time. Educate yourself. I mean, truly educate yourself. Have skin in the game. And if you say it's too hard, then you're just quitting on yourself. And if you're going to quit on yourself, look, just close the laptop right now. Don't watch me and Lloyd anymore. Don't tell any of your friends. But for the people out there that want more, There's a lot more out there. And do I think we can fix it? I do. I think we can fix it. I think we can mitigate it. And I personally, sorry about all these street cleaners, but I personally think that 5G is going to be our inflection point, meaning that it's going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
And that may be a really counterintuitive thing for me to end on, because I think it's going to open people's eyes to just how bad EMF is. And then we're going to focus on it. Because you remember, all of the public is reaction. I mean, it happened here in New Orleans. When we had Katrina, we knew a hurricane was a big risk, but we never did anything to fix the problems. So we got pounded. Well, I look at 5G as humankind's Katrina. It's coming. Be ready. And if you want to be ready, look, I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I want to be their wake-up call.
Yeah. Okay. So we will rise. I agree. And I believe, too, that it will be a good thing, because it's just something it's going to be painful, but we're going to rise from the ashes. I also believe this. It's going to be a wake-up call for people of the 5G. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for being blunt. Thank you for being honest. And thank you for sharing your truth. Thank you to Jack for being part of this summit.
Anytime.
And for all of you who've joined us today, thanks for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for our next session. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.